Pradeep's apprehension was that this was going to be a graveyard shift. This must be the busiest graveyard on the planet. Thank you all for being here at an hour which is normally quite soporific, and for being part of this session, which is about as eclectic as you can get, but that's Jaipur for you. So we have Pradeep Mehta, an illustrious son of this very city. He's been an activist, a consumer activist most of his life, and now he turns the other way. He turns his lens to look at the Supreme Court and the economy. And then we have two people from the world of business, one who's been both a proponent and then a student of business, and Lulu, who's a branding expert. Thank you all for being here. Time, of course, is short, so I'm going to ask Pradeep to get up and talk about the Supreme Court and the Indian economy. And I'm going to be very harsh. Pradeep, you have 7 minutes, and I'm going to knock on your nut at 5. Okay, 8.
A very good afternoon to all of you, and I'm very pleased to be here to speak with you about a subject of which I'm very passionate about, justice. That has been the basis of the organization that I founded in 1983. We are a 40-year-old organization. Now, when I was introduced by Mohit as a consumer activist, we were a consumer activist, we were a consumer protection group for many, many years, and then we realized that consumer welfare cannot be extended unless you impact policy. And one of the things which we came across was that the way our judiciary, and not only Supreme Court, but even other organs of the judiciary, the National Green Tribunal, etc., deal with matters which do not look at the economic impact of those particular decisions and create further problems. We analyzed 6 cases. To begin with, it was Niti Aayog which gave us a study to do on that infamous ban of sale of liquor 500 meters from the highway, which was an absolutely irrational order because it could never be implemented. And that is what we pointed out, that the point is that you should look at the enforceability of an order before passing it. Talk to experts about it, talk to the executive, etc. about it. Now, Supreme Court is a public institution, like any other institutions. We have the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, the 3 arms of the government, but none of them are divorced from public welfare. They all are tuned to deliver public welfare in one manner or the other. Whether they do it or not is something which a watchdog society like us tries to keep track of. And that is what we've been successful, as was defined by Professor Jagdish Bhagwati in his introduction, which was read out by the moderators. Now, what is the motivation for the book? Environment, economy, and equity concerns are increasingly getting intermixed. Right, sorry. Sorry about that. Are the slides on?
Yes.
Okay, fine, good. So the motivation were 6, but let me just talk to you about 2 of them, which are very important. The environment, economy, and equity concerns are increasingly getting intermixed and posing complicated questions for the judiciary. Supreme Court decisions have far-reaching consequences and often impact those not directly impacting the livelihoods. There has been a debate on livelihoods and environment, and therefore what we looked at was as to what would be the impact on livelihoods. Now, we are a developing economy. We are not a rich country. A debate which I saw Narayan Murthy just now, he spoke about a 70-hour week. Somebody else, Subramaniam of L&T, spoke about 90-hour a week. I do believe that we need to work hard, as I do. Now, the case that we began with was banning liquor sales, as I said. Then the second case was public health and emission standards. cancelling coal block allocations, the 2G case, a labyrinth of policies, procedures, employers, and the adjusted gross revenue case. So the last two cases, the second last two cases dealt with telecom, and this is what the moderator has asked me to focus on. They throw up a very interesting dimension. The last case that we have here is Shiv Shakti Sugars Limited versus Renuka Sugar Limited, when the Supreme Court cited the importance of law in economics. So you have a judgment which looked at aspects of law in economics that you cannot ignore the economics of any legal case because it could have an adverse impact, and that is what this judgment spoke about. And let me tell you, speak about the legitimacy. I can't see, can you see my slides?
Here they are.
Sorry. Sorry. Well, I've already spoken about 6 cases. The framework, now this is important for us to understand as to what was the framework of these studies. One is we'll look for legitimacy of the order. Did the court go beyond its remit in the AGR case? AGR is the adjusted gross revenue case. Second, did the court substitute its judgment for a policy decision or an expert opinion in the coal allocation case? The second dimension we looked at was suitability. Is the decision enforceable and implementable? As I said, the liquor ban, the law non-BS4 vehicles. Can the decision result in desired impact, the liquor ban? All kinds of intoxicants take place. Well, the court had good intention of banning sale of liquor, but did it make any sense? Did it stop drunken driving? No, it did not. It could not have. And besides liquor, there are other intoxicants as well which the drivers consume. Third is, the third element in this was, well, are there alternate remedies available or not? This is a central theme which we have run throughout the book. Under every case, we have not just analyzed it, but we have also proposed alternate remedies. There's no point talking about problems if you don't know what solutions could be. The third important framework was proportionality. Can the decision have unintended consequences, particularly on stakeholders and parties to the matter? Liquor ban, for example, caused a huge loss to the tourism industry, the hospitality industry, running into courts. Are sanctions proportionate to the fault or some genuine entities penalized, like the coal case? Some of the guilty parties, government officers and politicians, have not been sufficiently penalized in the 2G case. Yeah. And let me come to the telecom sector, the AGR case to begin with, and the 2G license case. Now, in the 1980s, when Vajpayee was the Prime Minister, and we had this, who was the telecom minister? No. Sorry, the gentleman who died from Maharashtra. A brilliant man. The mobile telephony just started in India, and they allocated licenses on the basis of gross payment, gross license payment. Now, after a few months, found telecom operators. Many of you might remember that those days we had to even pay for receiving a mobile telephone call. It was so very expensive. And the telecom operators told the government that we can't operate under these conditions. So they took a bold decision to shift from that lump sum payment to a revenue sharing basis. Now, at the same time, the 2G license thing which came up later on, but the revenue sharing case was very interesting in the sense that the revenues to be, as understood by the telecom operator, was that they would be shared on the basis of the operating revenues and not the gross revenues. The gross revenues could comprise of sale of handsets, for example, sale of scrap, sale of any service which is not operational as far as telecom is concerned. Now, there was a bit of unclarity there in the sense that the bureaucrats fudged it up and the telecom operators were out on a loose end, and then they went to the court. That Supreme Court in this particular case was no less than the bureaucrats. they continue to. The latest, this case is still not dead, the adjusted gross revenue case. You know, what could have happened was, in the event that Vodafone India had nearly collapsed and would have sort of died down, we would have been left with two operators, Airtel and Jio. That would not have been good for the market or the economy or the consumers. Because very limited, I mean, you have the BSNL and the MTNL, but they hardly provide any kind of competition in the telecom sector.
Pradeep, I'm going to interject here and say that the Supreme Court is supposed to put an end to everything. It's the Supreme Court. But the AGR case is still continuing. The government is talking about reversing AGR.
Right.
What went wrong?
No, you're right. You're right. The government, is, in its wisdom for a change, has agreed to withdraw the huge demand, humongous demand, something like 80,000 crores on the three telecom operators. And the Supreme Court said, you have no business to do that. The matter was already pending. So what I would infer it as is kind of an ego battle.
Please, yeah. So I have one question for you, which is that is the Supreme Court, does it have the domain expertise to rule on economic matters?
Unfortunately, no. And one of the solutions that we suggested in the book is that they must set up a committee which comprises of economists and cost accountants, chartered accountants, statisticians, financial analysts in order to arrive at the right decision. And this, they are allowed under the Constitution of India, Article 142(1), which was taken use of by the Shiv Shakti sugar case, that it allows the Supreme Court to look at an issue comprehensively.
Lulu, we were talking before this about what would be the impact of this kind of indecision, inconclusive treatment of an issue by the Supreme Court on the business world.
Hello. While Pradeep was presenting, I was thinking about the uncertainty for business leaders when you can't be sure of the economic analysis and the justice that's meted out by the court. And so this is added uncertainty in an environment that already has so much uncertainty. So is there any way in which business leaders can better prepare for such situations?
I fully agree with Lulu. In fact, what I could not speak about was the 2G case where licenses were cancelled wholesale. And that led to a huge amount of problems for a very large number of telecom operators. And not only that, an important aspect of it was not looked at by the court were our international relations. Norway, Singapore, UAE had a telecom operating license in India, their companies. So all of them had to surrender themselves. The licenses were cancelled. You know. Why? Because the then telecom minister, A. Raja of DMK, used to call himself, I'm the Prime Minister of Telecom. Can you imagine? Have you got the
It's
point?
all about ego. It's all about ego. Which
No, you know, more than ego. It is the amount of cash that he would debit to Madras. To be very honest.
We're in the realm of defamation over here. Let's not go there. But I'm going to stay with this point of humility and ego, which the Supreme Court cannot practice, and use that as a segue into your book, Lulu. This is something that we talk about in how to improve yourself and how to move forward. So we have two great books that I've thoroughly enjoyed reading. The first is by Lulu. It's called Go Further, Faster. She says it's written primarily for women who want to take a leap forward in the world of business, but I think it's quite gender non-specific. It could apply as well to any of us. And then Leapfrog, which is written not just by Mukesh, who's here, but by Priyank Narayan, who's in the audience. Thank you, Priyank, for contributing to this book. So since there's a lot of commonalities and overlap between the two books, what we're going to do is to go directly from Lulu's presentation into Mukesh's, then have a few comments from the panel, and then throw the entire session open to the audience. Lulu.
Great. Thank you so much, Mohit. Absolutely fantastic to be here. It's my first JLF, and fantastic to be here, sharing some insights from my book, Go Further Faster, Shaping a Life That Matters. The three most often questions I get asked are why I wrote the book, how did I even find time to write it, given my career, and what exactly the book is about. So why did I write the book? As a leader, my purpose is to help others rise to their full potential. I did a lot of workshops on branding and personal branding, and I would get many requests for mentorship. And I just couldn't find the time to dedicate to each of these women or men who were coming to me and asking for guidance on how to think about their careers, how to go further in the corporate world. And so I decided the next best thing I could do was to put down everything that I had learned over the years in a very friendly format with practical lessons, sharing lessons from my own life, and make it a very actionable book. How did I do it? Well, I woke up very early in the mornings, I dedicated time on weekends, and I gave up Netflix and any other distractions to ensure that I had the discipline to get it done. And what is the book about? When people see the title, sometimes they mistake it as hacks. Go further faster. Are there 5 things I can do right now that's going to get me to the top of the ladder? That's not the intent of the book. I want to share that success isn't just about speed. It isn't about rising to the top, being the CEO, but it is about aligning your path with purpose and relentlessly, with drive, tenacity, and ambition, pushing beyond what you think is possible. So my book is divided into 3 parts. The first part is about developing yourself. I advocate a holistic approach, a mind, body, soul approach to professional growth. Of course, mind is something that you all will be familiar with. It's constantly learning. It's things that you do to become a better reader, a better writer, a better communicator, a better negotiator, for example. The body is now starting to get more traction in the corporate world. We are taking care of ourselves, so everything from nutrition to managing your energy to sleep is important, and I talk about that. And then soul, in the first part, mind, body, soul, is about kindness, gratitude, ambition. It's all of those softer things that can truly make the difference. The second part of the book is where I use the principles from the branding world to help you build a personal brand that will give you a competitive advantage in your career and workplace. And the third part of the book is to constantly evolve yourself. Everything that you can do in terms of contribution, continuous learning, mentoring others, to make sure that you understand that success isn't just a destination to be reached, but something that you keep working on. Now, I get a lot of questions on personal branding. And so I've just borrowed this framework from Adam Bryant's The Leap to Leader. Anybody who is serious about leadership should definitely read this book. He talks about how it's not enough in the workplace to be a workhorse. Many of us are workhorses, especially women. We work hard, we relentlessly give of our time and energy to the organization, but we never talk about our achievements. If you're a workhorse, it's not enough. On the other hand, especially on LinkedIn and social media, we see a lot of show ponies where people are talking about their achievements without that substance. What Adam says, and I wholeheartedly endorse, to be a star performer, you need to balance both. Contributing relentlessly, but also showcasing your achievements in a very, very humble way. Finally, what I really urge everyone to think about in the book is what is your X factor? What is it that makes you you, that sets you apart in your field of profession, and how do you do that to get personal advantage and steer yourself ahead? And but more importantly in life, how do you want to be remembered? That's the legacy you're going to leave for your family, for your friends, and society at large. That's the essence of my book. I hope you pick it up, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Lulu. If you had to write an epitaph for yourself today, what would it be?
putting me on the spot.
That's my job.
I'd love to say that here was a brand evangelist who used the power of brand to help companies create commercial impact and individuals' personal legacy.
Thank you so much. All yours, Mukesh.
Good afternoon. Mohit, you haven't figured out big mistake you made today. You've called a professor to the panel. You invited him to talk. Now you can't stop him talking.
Oh, just try me. I've got the biggest voice in the room.
So I'm going to conduct this like I do my classes and give you a preview of what an I Am Ahmedabad class is typically like. So I'll start by showing you a slide. The important thing before we teach at I Am Ahmedabad is to unlearn what you already know. Just before we started, I discovered Aditya, one of my students from I Am Ahmedabad. Can you give him a mic, please? Now, Aditya, if you have a number of other students around you, I want you to stand up and repeat what you see on the screen.
I don't know anything.
Three times loudly.
I don't know anything. I will never know anything until I read Leapfrog. I don't know anything. I will never know anything until I read Leapfrog. I don't know anything. I will never know anything until I read Leapfrog.
Okay, the objective was to wake you guys up after your lunch. Let me now get into the book and talk to you a little bit about how me and my co-author Priyank, can you raise your hand? We wrote this book together. Priyank teaches at Ashoka. I am a visiting faculty there and also at I Am Ahmedabad. And we decided to identify 6 practices that people could use if they wanted to thrive. When I was much younger, there was a book on being built to last. Very soon after the book was written, all the companies that the book had talked about all disappeared. So we argued that you shouldn't be built to last. You should be built to thrive. And how can you be built to thrive? We identified 6 practices that you can be built to thrive with. The first was developing grit. We then have spoken about nudging yourself. Nudging is a common phenomenon now. Richard Thaler got the Nobel Prize for it. But we approached it from a slightly different angle. How can you nudge yourself? We talk about being intellectually humble and realizing how little we all know. Since we are teaching at liberal arts colleges, we have talked of dancing with disciplines. How the cross-pollination of ideas leads to more creativity. We've talked of curation with all the information overload we all have. How can we curate and get what is necessary for us? And because we are basically teachers of entrepreneurship, the 6th practice we've talked about is thinking like an entrepreneur. And we've named all these practices, as you can see. We have also answered a very simple question, so what? You've told me about the practice, how do I implement it in the real world? And we've identified pillars. So I'll walk you through 1 or 2 practices, and hopefully if they engage you, urge you to read the book online or buy a copy of the book. Okay, so grit, traditionally we always believed that it was how intelligent you are and how talented you are that would decide how successful you are. And Angela Duckworth has done a lot of research and identified grit, which is patience and perseverance, which is much more important than intelligence or anything else that you might have. And we have looked at something called deliberate practice. Now, in deliberate practice, if you do the same thing every day for a year, at the end of the year, you will be no better than you were at the start of the year. So we have talked about making that 1% improvement every day. And if you do that every single day, at the end of a year, you will be something like 37 or 38 times better than you were at the start. And deliberate practice involves not just thoughtless repetitions, but making those changes. Not doing what you are good at, but what you are not good at to improve yourself. And that is what we have discussed, and through examples and stories, we have narrated what deliberate practice is. one thing we have engaged with is boredom. Now, we believe that people who are well known in their field, athletes, for example, don't get bored. We find that boredom is a common phenomena with everybody. And we have looked at the spelling bee champions. These are young kids in the 7th, 8th, 9th grade, and most of them are Indian, and how they manage to relieve boredom. And we have used a number of stories to explain each of these practices.
I love the story about the grandmother.
Yeah, so these kids they had to practice for hours and hours learning the Latin and the Greek and the Spanish roots of verbs, which can be quite boring. So to entertain themselves and relieve boredom, they got their grandmother to say the word. The grandmother was from India, so she pronounced the word completely differently. And that would entertain them, they would laugh, relieve their boredom. Okay, so this is my favorite chapter on intellectual humility, and I'm going to explain it through the story that we have in the book. You know, old grandmothers' tales that if you put lemon juice in a pen and you write with it, nothing is legible till you iron the sheet of paper. So this guy sitting in the US hears about this and he says, this is very interesting. And he takes some lemon juice and applies it on his face. He then takes a Polaroid camera and takes an image of himself. And guess what? The image is blank. Now maybe the film was bad, maybe the camera was pointed in the wrong direction, whatever, but this gave him a tremendous amount of confidence. So he applies lemon juice liberally on his face, and he goes and robs the neighborhood bank. Not only does he do that, but he waves out to the camera in the bank because he believes that he is invisible. Within an hour, the cops land up at his house and they arrest him. He, of course, pleads, I applied the juice. The cops take him away to the police station. This story gets repeated in a newspaper. And a professor of psychology, David Dunning, asks a simple question. Can any of us be so stupid that we don't know how stupid we are? And that leads to what we call as intellectual humility, where you engage with the field, you initially have a lot of confidence in it about yourself. As you dig further, you realize that you don't know enough about the field and your confidence falls. But as you continue that engagement, you start getting a little more confident and your ability increases. The center part is what we call intellectual humility, realizing what you don't know. How am I doing on time?
You're doing fine. Maybe you should give this lesson to the Supreme Court. That's what Pradeep would say.
Okay. This is the most, one of the chapters that we liked a lot, Dancing with Disciplines. It all started with a guy called Matt Ridley. Now, Matt Ridley has a TED Talk, which I would urge you to go and watch. His research question was very simple. How have fishing tools evolved? How have they got more complex? How have they improved over time? And after a lot of research, he realized that the communities of islands that had good fishing tools, sophisticated fishing tools, were those that were larger in size and those that had immediate neighbors. And that tells us that the more we cross-pollinate ideas, the more we exchange ideas, the more creative we can be. He has named his TED Talk When Ideas Have Sex. I love that name, and I wanted to name the book When Ideas Have Sex. But my wife, who's sitting somewhere in the audience at the back, the lady with gray hair, she said, you name the book When Ideas Have Sex and you stay on it, I am Ahmedabad, for the rest of your life. Okay, do I have time for one more last slide? One more last slide. Then we come to being an entrepreneur and how you have to think about entrepreneurship, about always asking. Some of you may remember this picture. Can I have the book? And I'll read out just a short passage from the book. In 2019, Satvik Hegde was standing in line to welcome Prime Minister Narendra Modi during his visit to Houston, Texas. Over 50,000 people had gathered to see and hear the Indian Prime Minister and the US President Donald Trump. As the two leaders walked past the children, Satwik stepped forward and asked for a selfie. President Trump agreed. Prime Minister Modi, who was a few steps ahead, turned back to join the huddle. Extending his hand, Satwik clicked the most powerful selfie in the world. The expression on the face of the girl next to Satwik told a bigger story. Her eyes widened and her hands covered her mouth. How could Satwik have been so audacious? Later, in a television interview, the 13-year-old Satwik was very nonchalant. It doesn't really hurt to ask for something that you really want. So this chapter is about asking and not letting your ego come in the way of a no. Because the first no could lead to a lot more, and maybe you'll get a yes.
One of my very accomplished colleagues once said in Hindi, he said, "पूछने में क्या हर्ज है? जीभ तो चमड़े की है." You know, your tongue is only a piece of leather. It's not going to get excessively hurt. There's no harm asking. That was wonderful. You know, one of the things that I really liked, Lulu, that you said over there was that the nudge, this is something that he also said, is to yourself. The race is not outside of you. It's to you. And I love that story about Michael Phelps, who was the favorite for a particular race and lost when he looked up. And I think that's such a powerful lesson. Don't look up. The race is only against yourself. But Mukesh, you know, this whole story of grit, this came into the popular limelight when Malcolm Gladwell talked about the 10,000-hour rule. It almost seemed then as though everybody could become a Bjorn Borg if they practiced for 10,000 hours. And I think this also led people astray. I know that this was then refuted, it was questioned. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the concept of 10,000 hours was picked up by Malcolm Gladwell. The originator of the concept was a guy called Andrea Ericsson. He was a Swedish guy who later became a professor at Florida State University, who spoke of deliberate practice. Now, he was very unhappy with the fact that Malcolm Gladwell had interpreted that as you do the same thing every day and you'll become an expert. What he argued was that you have to engage in deliberate practice, where you make that 1% improvement every single day that you do it. And as you saw on the slide, you'll be 38 times better. So while Andreas Ericsson thanked Gladwell, he passed away a few years ago, Professor Ericsson, he thanked Gladwell for having popularized 10,000 hours. It was a wrong interpretation. It is about being deliberate in your practice and not just practicing something.
You go on to say that it's not enough to practice on your own. Can you illustrate that?
Yeah, so you need a coach, you need a mentor who will point out to you what you're doing correct and what you're doing wrong. You need to do things that you're not comfortable with. We all like doing things that we enjoy, that we are good at. What we should be doing is what we are not good at. By the way, Bjorn Borg was somebody not from this generation that our listeners would associate with. Probably one of the current stars are a better example. And if you see them practice, if you go and watch Wimbledon a week before the matches start and see them practice, they're all doing that all the time now.
So one of the questions is that can you actually improve, Lulu, perhaps you would like to come on this, can you improve without a mentor? What are the tools that you have within yourself to improve?
I think self-awareness is the biggest one, where you can actually reach out to your colleagues, your bosses, your family members, and get a sense of the things that are really your strengths and those that might be blind spots. Actually, in my book, I've given a whole methodology by which you can determine exactly how to hone in and shine the spotlight on what you're really good at, but then find ways to have a plan to at least address some of those big blind spots that you have. And I think it all comes down to self-awareness. A lot of times in the corporate world, when we see mistakes, when we see corporate leaders do things that are clearly so wrong, it's just because they're self-aware. Nobody has ever given them feedback. Feedback is the other, right? It's connected to self-awareness. Ask for feedback. Don't shy away from feedback. Like Mukesh was saying earlier, don't let your ego get in the way, because actually it's feedback that can truly help improve you. In fact, one of the times I got feedback in the early days when I was talking about my journey, somebody in the audience later on came and told me that you're making it sound like it was such an easy journey. You never talked about the hurdles that you overcame. And actually that makes it quite boring if you just talk about the great successes that you had. So ever since, I've always tried to find a way to talk about a real difficulty that I had. And in the book, you'll see that I was actually very vulnerable. I talked about many of the mistakes I made in my career. And that's the thing that connects most with people. So feedback and self-awareness is what I would say.
You also talk about the role of meditation. Sorry, Mukesh, go ahead.
I want to jump in because failure is something that we've also looked at from an entrepreneurial standpoint. And failure is something that entrepreneurs treasure. In the corporate world, in life, we think we have failed at something. Entrepreneurs look for the learning in that failure, how they can improve, how they can change something. And failure is not a bad word in the field of entrepreneurship at all.
Actually, that's a mindset people in the corporate world should definitely channel more.
And it's something that has characterized the success of Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
where people had no problem. In fact, it's almost like you need to have a failure on your resume if you want VCs to fund you. So that is a paradigmatic shift, which I think we need to make in this country as well. Would you like to say something, Pradeep, before we throw it open to the audience?
Let me say something which is not humble, but to say that I am a practitioner of most of what we speak about in terms of preaching. Now, one of the reasons is, which is going to be exhibited in my next book, which is called The Incorrigible Optimist.
The Incorrigible Optimist.
Yeah, that's what I am, otherwise I won't be doing what I'm doing. And on endurance, Mukesh, I have a little disagreement with you. I mean, the endurance is not necessarily competitive, but it can be on its own. That you need to be hardworking, you need to be enduring all kinds of situations that you come across without being in competition with anything or anyone.
Yeah. So we have talked about this whole theory of small wins. If you wait for the big win, it never happens. But if you celebrate small wins and have milestones, that's when the big win will finally come. And we've got a number, our book is a bunch of stories. So you have all these stories about people who celebrate small wins and then achieve something big, but not people who just wait for the big event, which may or may not happen, Pradeep.
One of the stories of JLF was on its first edition. There were about 5 people in the audience, and then a bunch of Japanese tourists came in. They weren't exactly the win that we wanted, but actually we had a full hall, right? So that was a small win.
In fact, on JLF, there's a case study by Harvard Business School on JLF. We teach that case study. And there's a reprint that Tarun has now come out with recently.
Professor Tarun Khanna from
Khanna,
Harvard.
yeah.
I'm going to be in a talk with him later today, talking about trust and entrepreneurship. So thanks for advertising my
So failure is part of every entrepreneur's journey. And I think this is a classic case of an entrepreneurial startup that started in a small way and see how big it is today.
Brilliant.
In 20 odd years.
Okay, time for questions. The gentleman in the back there, I think he's wearing blue. Can a volunteer go? And then there's a lady in about the 5th row with red. Can a mic get to her in preparation? Please keep your questions short. Yeah.
Hello. It's for Pradeep, sir. So just wanted to know, how does Supreme Court sees as a stakeholder? It's because of the AGR case. Now, for the AGR case, the stakeholders were not just the government. It was the company, the customers. It was also the employees, not of the company itself, but vendors. But why the Supreme Court just thought about the government at that time? How do you see that?
Shall I answer? Yes, please. Yeah, it's a very good question. I think we all are stakeholders, and something which, because of the limitation of time, I could not speak about, is that telecom has really revolutionized the economy in the country. All of us are beneficiaries of that. And therefore, the way the Supreme Court handles it, the Supreme Court should be able to look at it holistically, rather than 2 cases that I spoke about, and I'll be happy to write a follow-up book on just these 2 cases. Thank you.
Yeah. Next question, please. Please keep it short.
So the Supreme Court often gives judgments that are against economics and international relations. For example, the Nestle judgment that just came. So, and it calls it complete justice under Article 142. So, is it worth correcting or curative petitions per se?
I agree with you. I have written 2 articles on that very recently, one in the Mint with Vijay Kelkar and another in the Financial Express. You will read both. The one in Financial Express goes more into technical details, but in the one in the Mint talks about the matter precisely on that. Now here what happened was that the department, the Finance Ministry kept sleeping on it. Article 90 of the Income Tax Act needed to be amended to allow the notification to happen. If it did not happen, we just cut a sorry figure. And the then Revenue Secretary spoke about the fact, he made a very good statement. He was speaking to income tax officers that we should not only look at the revenues but also the economy. Now, if that golden principle is applied to many of these issues, then we will not face these kind of problems. Then on the other hand, the Supreme Court just did not address it. They said, look, it's a policy issue, and if the government has not done it, we can't do anything. There was no reason for Supreme Court then should have said that, look, we are not going to comment on it. Just stay out of it. The high courts were better. High courts dealt with the same issue in the past, and they came out with very good judgments. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
So I just have one question again to Mr. Pradeep. Why is there no law against retrospective law? All laws, all rulings by Supreme Court which are retrospective are extremely harmful to the economy and the state of the nation. So why is there no law against retrospective law at all?
That's a good question. You can't pass a law to ban another law. You know? No, it's a very interesting question to pursue politically. That look, there should be a law. If you remember the famous Vodafone UK case, the retrospective taxation, which the then Supreme Court bench headed by Justice, the Parsi gentleman, I forget the name, had passed an order that this is nonsense. And Pranab Mukherjee brought in a law to overcome that. Subsequently, Arun Jaitley as finance minister said, I'll try to reverse this judgment, but then anything which has been passed into law, to unravel it takes much more effort than it would otherwise. But you can't have a law which bans retrospective law. You require good policy thinking that you can't have retrospective legislation. The problem is the government of India relied upon many foreign governments who passed retrospective laws as well. Now, that you have to then prove. And in this matter, Supreme Court did rightly. In the Vodafone UK case of the capital gains tax, they said, no, this is nonsense. This will not apply. But yet, Pranab Mukherjee then passed a law to overcome it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sir, you talked about repetitive practice, right, to improve on things. How about, repetitive practice to improve on things? Often we've observed that repeating the same thing and again, we hit a plateau. And then we go nowhere. So how important it is to also take a break?
Yeah. So it's important to do what we call deliberate practice, where you have a mentor, where you're someone who's watching and seeing what you are doing, and then asking you to make those small improvements, 1% improvement every time. And if you keep doing that for a year, you'll be 38 times better. So it's not about doing the same thing every day. It's about that small improvement every day, which will land you at many multiples of what you are in terms of capability at the end of the year.
Are there any other questions?
Question here.
Yeah, please.
There's a lady here.
Hello, sir. So, as you are a professor of IIM and myself and pass out from IIT Madras and currently teaching in Kota, but as a student of you, I want to ask you something.
Okay.
So, yes. So, I am working in a corporate company, like I am connected with the EdTech company, but the work I am doing in 8-hour job I am doing, but along with that, I want to start my own business, right? Suppose for spending 1 hour in my day-to-day life, the amount of money I am making from my job, the same I am making from my that 1 hour schedule. But one fear factor is always there. I am not able to quit the job. So how to make sure that it is the right time to start your own business? Like how can we have
Got
that
the question,
confidence?
yeah.
Okay, so I operate a consultancy service. You can talk to me beyond this. this is a very
we're going to take a commission on that.
this is a very personal decision you will have to take. It's
You know, if you saw Mukesh's book, it was I thought he was professor of marketing.
this is not an easy question to answer. I think it's a personal choice. I would say start both. The moment you can load your costs onto your business, that is the time for the business to set sail. But don't start something and put all the costs right away. Your business may not be able to afford it. If you are partners, one of you can be full-time and gradually you can. But this is a very generic answer. I would like to maybe engage with you after the session and look at your specific case.
But I'll just say one thing, which is one of the most successful entrepreneurs I back, who started with nothing. He said, courage is the first virtue.
Yeah.
Hi, good evening. Good afternoon. It's been great to listen to everyone. My question is actually my question is actually to Miss Lulu. So you spoke about how your book talks about branding and it also talks about health. So just wanted to understand that recently there's been a lot of talks and development towards the area of health becoming a very important part of the entrepreneurs and founders inculcating the same in their day-to-day habits. So do you think it's something which the companies are using as a branding strategy, or is it rather that there is actually a societal awareness which we can see being inculcated?
I think health and wellness is no longer a trend. 10 years ago, when you looked at what are the consumer trends, mega trends in the world, it was one that kept popping up. It's now firmly being established as something that everyone has to pay attention to. Companies are not using it as a branding tool. They recognize that healthy employees, energetic employees are more creative and productive employees. So I see across corporate India, there are very sincere efforts towards health and wellness programs to invest in employees. But of course, it has a beneficial impact.
It's also enlightened.
In fact, in the entrepreneurship field, there's a big scare going on. You probably, if you follow it, of heart attacks, of young entrepreneurs in their 30s and 40s having heart attacks. So I think health and wellness is something that we have to be focused on 24/7.
Great question. Thank you.
Okay, a great note on which to depart. Look after yourselves, look after your employees, have long and healthy lives. Thank you very much, all three of you.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big, big thank you to our speakers.